The Klamath people, the indigenous tribes who walked this jagged land long before the Park Service ever put up a gate, they have a rule about this place. It is not a suggestion. It is a law of survival that has been passed down through centuries of blood and ice. They knew something about the geography here that modern maps simply do not show. They would not look at the water. Specifically, they refused to gaze into the impossible blue depths of that volcano because they believed it invited death. To them, that lake was not just a body of water sitting in a crater. It was a doorway, a hungry mouth waiting to open. We have hikers vanishing in mere seconds, literally blinking out of existence while their partners are standing right there. We have children there one moment, gone the next, while parents are standing 5 feet away screaming their names into a void that refuses to answer back. We have bodies found years later, miles from where they disappeared, in locations that defy physics and logic and human endurance. These victims are found in places where no person without climbing gear could possibly go. Yet there they are. I am David Paulides, and this is the CANAM Missing Project. Today, we need to talk about the silence at Crater Lake. A silence that is heavy and unnatural. I have spent years categorizing and investigating these disappearances in our national parks, and I do not deal in ghost stories. I deal in facts. I deal in patterns. And the pattern here is terrifying. There is perhaps no pattern more disturbing, more dense, and more ancient than what is happening at Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. The Park Service will tell you it is a beautiful destination and the deepest lake in the United States. They will sell you a postcard and tell you to stay on the trail. But if you talk to the elders of the Klamath tribe, they will tell you it is the battleground between Skell, the spirit of the sky, and Lau, the spirit of the below world. They call it Giwas, a spiritual place, a dangerous place. I am going to share 2 cases with you today that prove this is not just folklore. These are not stories I made up for views. These come from police reports and Freedom of Information Act requests and tearful family interviews. When you hear the details, I want you to ask yourself if a human perpetrator could do this. Could a bear do this without leaving a single trace of blood or struggle? Or are we dealing with something that simply opens up and swallows people whole? Let us go back to October 14th in the year 2006. We have a young boy named Sammy Boehlke, 8 years old, a bright kid with mild autism. I have told you folks before, high intellect and certain disabilities are a distinct profile point in these cases, and it happens over and over again. Sammy is with his father at Cleetwood Cove, which is a very popular spot with plenty of tourists. It is late afternoon and the light is starting to fade just a bit, casting long shadows through the trees. Sammy steps away from his father. We are talking about a distance of maybe 50 feet. No more than the length of a school bus. His dad turns his head to look at the scenery for a split second. He looks back, and Sammy is gone. He did not run away. He simply ceased to be there. In a normal situation, if a kid wanders off, you hear him walking. You hear twigs snapping under his feet. You hear crying. You hear movement. Sammy's father ran to the spot immediately and yelled for his son until his voice was raw. But there was only silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. The Park Service initiated a massive search, and they brought in the best trackers they had. They had air support and ground pounders, walking grid lines, shoulder to shoulder. But most importantly, they brought in the canines. And here is the profile point you need to pay attention to. The inability of canines to track scent is something we see in the most baffling cases. The dogs were brought to the point last seen and they sniffed the ground, circled, and then they just sat down. They acted terrified, whimpering with their tails between their legs, refusing to go into the woods. It was as if Sammy Boehlke evaporated into thin air. Because if he walked away, there would be a scent trail for those dogs to follow. Then, almost immediately after the disappearance, severe weather rolled in. Snow and freezing rain hammered the mountain, wiping the slate clean. This is a missing 411 staple. The weather hits right after the event to hinder the searchers and ground the helicopters. It is almost intelligent. It happens too often to be a coincidence. Sammy Boehlke has never been found. Not a shoe. Not a shirt. Nothing. Now let us go back to 1975. To a case that keeps me up at night. This is the case of Charles McCullar, a young and fit 19-year-old man. He was an avid photographer who traveled from Virginia to Oregon specifically to photograph Crater Lake in the winter. He was organized. He was not reckless. And he knew how to handle himself outdoors. He planned to take photos of the lake in the snow, so he enters the park in late January. He leaves his heavy equipment in the lodge, takes his camera, and heads out into the white. He never comes back. And the silence of the forest swallows him up. The FBI gets involved and the family is absolutely frantic. Charles's father, a dedicated man, drops everything and moves to Oregon to camp out and search for his son when the Park Service gave up. It was not until October of 1976, over a year later, that two hikers found something in a remote canyon called Bayari Canyon. They found a backpack, and inside were keys and some undeveloped film rolls. Rangers arrive and they find human remains. But the condition of the remains does not make sense. Charles was found 12 miles from where he started, in deep, fresh snow over incredibly rugged terrain. He had no snowshoes with him. Folks, I have talked to experts, and to walk 12 miles in 5 feet of fresh powder without snowshoes is physically impossible. You would post hole, meaning you sink up to your waist with every step, and you would die of exhaustion in the first 2 miles. But it gets worse, because the body was not scattered by animals. His pants were unbuckled and down around his ankles. And he had no boots on. His socks were just sitting on the log next to him, perfectly placed, as if he sat down to take a rest. No boots were ever found. How does a man walk 12 miles in deep snow, barefoot? Why are his clothes removed in such a specific way without being torn by predators? This isn't just paradoxical undressing from hypothermia. Because hypothermia victims do not make it 12 miles across a canyon in a blizzard first. And when they developed the film in his camera, what did they see? They did not see photos of the lake or the trees or the sky. They saw nothing. Just blur. Light leaks. And finally, a picture of nothing but absolute blackness. So what are we looking at here? Let us look at the profile points that connect Sammy, Charles, and dozens of others in this specific cluster. Instant separation where you turn your head and they are gone. Silence. The Oz factor, where the woods go completely quiet right before the event. Canines refuse to track because the scent just stops existing. Bad weather hits immediately to cover the tracks. And finally, impossible mobility, where victims are found in places they physically could not have reached on their own. The National Park Service will tell you these people got lost. They fell. They succumbed to the elements. I am telling you, that explanation does not fit the facts. If you fall, you leave a trail, and if you get lost, you leave footprints. These people are not leaving footprints. They are vanishing. I want to present a theory that is controversial, and the mainstream media will not touch it, but we have to look at what the indigenous people told us about the lake being a portal. Physicists today talk about thin spots, places where the barrier between our reality and somewhere else is weak. What if these victims are not walking away? What if they are falling through? Imagine a hunter walking through the woods on a trail he has walked 100 times. Suddenly the air pressure changes and he tastes metal in his mouth. The bird stops singing and the sound is sucked out of the world. He takes one step forward, and he is no longer in the Oregon we know. This would explain why the dogs cannot find a scent. The scent ends because the person is no longer on this geometric plane. It explains the impossible mobility. If Charles McCullar slipped through a portal, he could have traveled miles in that other dimension in what felt like minutes. He was deposited or returned miles away in our world in a location he could not have walked to. In physics, they call it an Einstein-Rosen bridge. The Klamath called it the home of Lao. The missing 411 phenomena often involves victims being found with their clothes removed or missing. We usually attribute this to hypothermia, but what if it is a byproduct of the transit? The immense pressure, the static electricity, the change in atmosphere of moving between dimensions could force clothes off the body. I have received letters from people who claim to have almost been taken. They describe a shimmering in the air like heat haze, a feeling of being watched, a sudden overwhelming sense of dread. They turned back and they ran for their lives. Sammy Boehlke did not get the chance to run. We are not talking about Bigfoot here. We are talking about the environment itself. We are talking about a trapdoor in reality. I do not tell you these stories to scare you. I tell you this because the authorities do not keep a list of the missing. They do not connect the dots. But when you put the pins on the map, the cluster at Crater Lake is undeniable. If you go to Crater Lake, do not go alone. Carry a personal locator beacon. Though if you slip through a rift, electronics might not help you. Keep your children within arm's reach. Not 10 feet. Strictly within arm's reach. There is a mystery in our woods. It is ancient. It is predatory. And it is undefeated. The silence at Crater Lake is not peace. It is the sound of something waiting.